Welcome to the Spirit of Mayberry, brought to you by Research Chief Spirit Walker from an undisclosed location deep within the bowels of the Andy Griffith Show Research Laboratory.
Today is Monday, October 31st, 2022. And on Monday, October 31st, 1960, the fifth episode of the Andy Griffith Show aired, entitled Irresistible Andy. Now, I titled this Fancast episode Unconventional Andy. See, in Irresistible Andy, Andy was convinced that he was irresistible to Ellie Walker. I am convinced that the Andy Griffith Show is unconventional to all other sitcoms. And I don't want you just to take my word for it. I'm going to tap into the boys in the lab. And I'm going to introduce two brand new members of the boys of the lab in this episode. And you'll hear what they have to say as well. But first, let's go to the GOAT. By that, I mean the greatest of all time, Mr. Randy Turner, my mentor in the research of the Andy Griffith Show. He is a historian of the show. He has written many books about the show. He has talked to the cast members. He's interviewed people. He is the GOAT. Randy, tell me, why do you think the Andy Griffith Show is unlike any other sitcom?
So how is the Andy Griffith Show different from other sitcoms? Well, especially if you're talking about modern sitcoms, the differences are so great that we couldn't possibly list them all. But I will talk about a couple that I think are important and fun to note. One is the pacing of the show. The Andy Griffith Show is a much slower paced show than most shows, not only of current shows, but even shows from that time period. The show is not afraid to take its time to tell a story. It's not afraid to have quiet scenes, such as those scenes on the front porch, where often the storyline is not even really advanced. I will say that I see on the internet a lot that people think those little types of scenes, like the front porch scenes, were ad-libbed by Andy Griffith and Don Knotts. That is not correct. They were not ad-libbed. They often were created by Andy and Don, and they came up with them. But if you think about when they're making a television show, you have to have the lighting set up, you have to have the sets ready. You don't just ad-lib things like that. So it is something they would come up with, but it would just be incorporated into the script. But again, those slow scenes, that's something you don't see on almost any other series, and the Andy Griffith Show is not afraid to do that. A second reason is the fact that the show is really very character-driven. That's certainly not the only series that is the case, but that's really where the humor flows. Andy Griffith very famously said that if it sounds like a joke, throw it out. He didn't want to just have it be that type of humor. It was based on the way people reacted to one another. If you watch most modern shows, I mentioned the pacing earlier on that other point, the first point. They literally need to have laughs. They want to have laughs on a very frequent basis. And they'll also sometimes refer to it as like a LPM, how many laughs per minute. And in fact, if you watch a lot of those shows, you'll see there's laughter just nonstop. It's hard for 5 seconds to go by without some other type of joke or gag or something to try to elicit a laugh. That's not how the Andy Griffith Show was. But again, the fact that they cared about one another so much, and they tried to lift one another up. If you watch especially modern sitcoms, I'm not saying all the time, but I would say most of the time, the humor is based on tearing somebody else down. That's where the humor is. Somebody's being made fun of or being poked fun at. And, that would happen on the Andy Griffith Show on a very rare occasion, but even then it was so good-natured. Yes, Andy would tease Barney occasionally with the lipstick on his nose, that kind of thing, but it was good-natured even when it was there. So again, there's so many differences, I can't possibly begin to list them all, but those are two that I think are very important differences to note. Take care, everyone.
What great comments. I love it, Randy. Thank you very much. Randy has a great radio voice, doesn't he? Yeah. He kind of talks like Gomer sings, doesn't he? I think he sings like Gomer talks, but that could be a rumor, and I could be wrong. But anyway, he has some great points. He was talking about the pacing of the show, and I love that idea of the pacing. They were not afraid to slow it down. He mentioned laughs per minute. I'm a stand-up comedian myself, and I know that stand-up comedians are always taught when they're mentored by older comedians, you need to have 4 LPMs a minute, 4 laughs per minute a minute. Shouldn't it be L's PM instead of LPMs? Anyway, you need to have 4 LPMs a minute. That's a laugh every 15 seconds. It should be joke, 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 joke. But if you listen to modern day comedians, they slow things down. They're not afraid to extend the setup in an inordinate amount of time in order to get a bigger laugh and even an applause break. And when you get that applause break and the crowd erupts into applause because of something that you took a little time to set up, to me, that's better than 4 LPMs. And the Andy Griffith Show was not afraid to take a little time and set something up. Some comedy magic would happen at the end of that setup. He talked about the pacing, how they would slow it down, like in the porch scenes. And somebody he mentioned that a lot of people think that was ad-libbed, but it was not. It was written into the script. Sometimes it was created by Andy and Don during the read-through. For instance, the bit about Barney memorizing the sheriff rules and memorizing the preamble to the Constitution, that's a hilarious bit. So much so that they performed it many, many years after the Andy Griffith Show was gone off the air or out of production. It was never off the air, but it out of production. They would perform it at parties, at stage shows. They performed it on variety shows because they were hilarious. But Don Knotts came up with that idea during a read-through, and he rehearsed it with Andy, and they said, "Let's put it in the show. This is gold," and it was comedy gold. When they were on the porch and they were talking about Barney buying his parents a 50th anniversary gift of a septic tank. It has nothing to do with the plot of Barney buying his first car. It just was talk on the porch like you would ordinarily hear. And it wasn't that it was so hilarious. It was an actual event. Everett Greenbaum actually did that. He bought his parents-in-law a septic tank for their anniversary. It may not have been real funny when Everett Greenbaum did it, but it was hilarious when Don Knotts did it. And what was the difference? The difference was that Don Knotts, as a comedian, we also talk about, there are some comedians that say funny things. And there are some comedians who say things funny. Don Knotts was the kind of comedian that you could literally write anything for him. The writers loved it because they said he would take what they wrote and he would turn it into comedy magic because he said things funny. And when he's talking about the septic tank, it's a highlight of Barney's first car episode. It's just great because the Andy Griffith Show and Randy's second point was character driven. It was driven because there were great characters. There were characters that were created that came and went, and there were characters that were always there, but they always went together and they always delivered the comedy goods. It was character driven. It wasn't comedy that was cruel. It was just people being people. And I think that's one of the appeals of the Andy Griffith Show. I grew up with someone that was like every single character of the show. I knew some people that were like Ernest T. Bass. I knew some people that were like Fred Goss, the dry cleaner. I knew some people that were like all these people that I see on the Andy Griffith Show because they were real. They were real and they were funny. They were funny to me when I was a younger man and a kid and a very small child. They were funny naturally. We all know people like that just say things funny. That's the Andy Griffith Show. Randy, thank you very much for weighing in on that subject. I really love to hear what you have to say. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to the two newest members of the Andy Griffith Show Research Laboratory 55, and hereafter to be referred to as the boys in the lab. They are the boys from the Loaded Goat podcast. And if you haven't listened to the Loaded Goat podcast, go on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from, and subscribe to their channel, because they're too, they say things funny. But their names are Aaron Tallent and Chris Cordingley. Now, they have the Loaded Goat podcast, which they started in 2020. And what they do is they break down episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. But they're, how do I say this? Young guys. They're not old like me and Randy. You know, they have a different perspective. And I love that they have a different perspective on the Andy Griffith Show than, say, Randy or myself or Randy. They have a different perspective. I sort of liken them to Wally Cleaver and Eddie Haskell. They're fun. They're fun guys to listen to. And I asked them if they would weigh in on this subject, because nobody that I know knows more about sitcoms and television and movies than these two guys right here. They know a lot of, and they know the new stuff. They can compare it to the newer stuff. They have very keen insight, and they're just a joy to listen to. And I want you to hear what they have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, the two newest members of the Boys in the Lab, Aaron Tallent and Chris Cordingley of the Loaded Goat podcast. Guys, tell us, what do you think sets the Andy Griffith Show apart from other sitcoms?
Welcome to the Loaded Goat. We are the goats.
I'm Aaron. This is Chris. And
I like calling us the goats.
You like calling us
but
the
like
goats?
not as greatest of all time, because that's
Just
Randy. But just we're goats. Like
we're just goats. We're just goats. Okay. All right. Well, I always like being referred to as a goat. Well, thank you, Spirit Walker, for having us on. We appreciate it. Happy Halloween, everyone. We're here today to talk about how the Andy Griffith Show influenced sitcoms and other areas of television. I guess the first thing I would just mention is just the single camera setup that went from, what you saw in the 50s with these almost live studio audience, or almost sometimes even live setups where you had multiple cameras and you were just kind of letting the scene play out. And with the Andy Griffith Show, it really was one of the first ones to go in with the single camera setup, where you're going around actually shooting the episode like you see with just major procedural dramas today, with like what you see with movies. It's just completely different than what was taking place before then. So that would be the first area of influence that I think this show brought. And then now you see that with so many other types of television.
Could you say just a little bit more about this? I'm struggling to like really capture what a single camera is. Like, what's an example of one that's not?
Like, okay, like okay, let's take sitcoms. Like, I guess the first one, and I mean, it's one that's on The Cosby Show. You know how I would always start The Cosby Show off, and they'd say The Cosby Show is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yep.
The Andy Griffith Show was, and so if you panned out, and or if you like take Saturday Night Live, like instance, or just any shows like that, and you pan out, and you see like multiple cameras set up, just capturing different things, and it's just kind of like they're switching back and forth. The Andy Griffith Show was very purposeful of almost shooting a single scene. And occasionally, obviously, you'd see those 2-minute scenes that would just play out under one camera, but a lot of the times they were going back and forth and doing different takes with different dialogue.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something I was going to say as well.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry if I stole what you were about to dive in on. I'm always stealing your thunder, and I apologize.
You are. All right. Give me another one.
All right. Well, another one is that people liked visiting Mayberry. The show really, its peak was seasons 3 and seasons 4. 5 was a good season as well. It started once Don Knotts left full time. and the show went to color and just kind of had a different feel, it started to decline a bit. It still stayed in the top of the Nielsen ratings and was number one in its final season. And and then even with the first two seasons of Mayberry RFD, it was in the top 10. And I think there's a general consensus that maybe the show wasn't as strong as it was, but people just liked visiting Mayberry once a week. And I think, yeah.
Would you say that Andy Griffith Show is the first one that kind of created a culture around a made-up place that people wanted to go to? Like, you think you can go to New York now and go do the Friends experience and things like that, and there's still Mayberry Days, and people go visit it, and there's more of a tourism to explore the set. Is the Andy Griffith Show the first one that did that?
I think so. I mean, I think there really wasn't a community, I think, set up in the way that Mayberry was. I mean, you had families, you had setups. I mean, even I Love Lucy took place in New York, but it was just mostly in Ricky and Lucy's apartment. It wasn't anything where it was it felt like there was an actual place that people were visiting. And it felt like with the Andy Griffith Show, I would say, even just watching it for the first time, like you are, it does feel kind of like you're visiting a different place.
Completely. Yeah, it's fun. It's super fun.
Yeah.
You know, the other example that I'd have that really picked this up and ran with it is real world, where you could rent these houses now. You know, people, they stayed in them, and then people, you know, they do a season, you know, in Miami, and then you can go find these houses and stay there now. So it's, you know, very similar to what I think all started with the Andy Griffith Show.
I think we're talking past each other on this. I think there is not that's not what I'm getting at. I would say if there was anything where you're kind of like, there's just a place there's places I like to go, or places I like to visit in television. Cheers was an example of just a place that you just enjoyed going. You loved
everybody knows your name. You know?
Yeah, I mean, on the television show, it was like Cheers was kind of just a place that you just like to glimpse into on a weekly basis. And, and I would have to say that, but I don't think, I guess that kind of brings us to Cheers and then Seinfeld but I think really what the Andy Griffith Show's greatest contribution to sitcoms, just to television in general, was just saying we'll have main characters, but what's really going to be entertaining is just the number of wild characters that are going to come in and out of this realm or out of this world, and we're going to just basically write these wild characters, hire good character actors to play them, and let them just run with it. And that's really what you see.
I completely agree. The other one I'd add in there is Law and Order. You know, they're always cycling through.
Good district attorneys.
They've got their core cohort of good actors, and then they've got the people that usually end up dying.
Are you talking about the cops? Are you talking about the DA, or the lawyers? Or are you talking about going on with a bunch of silliness?
I'm going on with a bunch of silliness.
I appreciate that, but let's get back to let's say we're going back to Seinfeld.
Okay.
I feel kind of like you have a straight man with Jerry, as you do with Andy. I would almost argue that that Barney Fife is broken up into two characters with this. You take George Costanza, and you say we're going to take all the worst characteristics of Barney Fife and roll them into a very narcissistic, not very nice human being. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, we're going to take all of Barney Fife's physical aspects and quirky views on life, and we're going to roll them into Kramer.
Yep, I agree with this wholeheartedly. And then I would also add, I'm feeling silly today, that you take all of the negative aspects of Aunt B and you roll them into Elaine.
I think you're being silly.
Yeah, I know.
But you do. I don't really know where I don't know where Elaine would fall out, other than she's kind of. I don't know how she would kind of fit into this, but I do think then you have the cast of just random characters that show up. I mean, there's not anybody that Andy really hates on the show, but you have a bunch of Newmans. You have a bunch of
for
different people who cause trouble the way Newman does.
Well, honestly, Otis is the Newman.
Otis is probably the Newman. I mean, obviously Seinfeld, all these characters are not as nice as the other characters on the Andy Griffith Show. But what made that, what both brought, was just this zany cast of characters that you just didn't know what was going to happen next.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I think the last thing I would say on this is, I mean, I just think if you just look at pop culture and you look at television, I mean, Andy Griffith and Mayberry still resonate. I mean, you had The Sopranos. There's an episode where they're talking about driving through the deep South and getting pulled over, and one of the guys tricks Polly Walnuts into telling the cop. He says, "Hey, I have a cousin on the force. Maybe you know him." He goes, "What's his name?" He goes, "Barney Fife." And the cop basically beats him up. I mean, there's an episode of Beavis and Butthead where they're doing they're basically watching a video, and it's a guy who looks like Don Knotts, and they do a whole riff on this being an episode of the Andy Griffith Show. And that's just, I mean, these are examples of darker shows or darker things. I mean, when Andy Griffith passed away, Breaking Bad did a homage to the Andy Griffith Show on the Emmys, where Walt and Jesse were walking down to the fishing hole. So it's just kind of the show has touched people in different ways, in so many different ways. So while you can't see always just the direct influence, it's a show that people from all walks of life love. And the last thing I'll say on this is we had the fortune of interviewing Jack Dodson's daughters, and Jack Dodson, who played Howard Sprague, and his daughters were saying that he would be seen, he'd be out and about walking on the street. One time he walked past Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali went, "Howard," and John Wayne did the same thing. So it's just, the show just reached so many people.
It's huge.
Yeah.
People are still talking about it. We're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it. We're doing it. We're doing this, and we really are so glad to be able to participate. And so with that, we thank you and keep watching.
Thank you.
I told you they were a hoot. I told you they were fun to listen to. You go listen to their podcast, the Loaded Goat podcast. You got to hear it. And okay, I might have a little ulterior motive. I'm going to be on their podcast in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be talking about, not only are we going to do an episode about my book, the Andy Griffith, or the Mayberry Rerun Watcher's Guide to Season 1, but we're also going to, in another podcast, we're going to tape 2 back to back, and we're going to break down an episode for you, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. And the haunted house episode, I think, is the one that they want me to help them break down. So we're going to talk about some great things. It'll be fun. So the Loaded Goat podcast, guys, you did great. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of the Boys in the Lab. I love some of the points that they made. I love all the points that they made, but let me just kind of comment on the 4 main points. I think it was 4 that Aaron made and Chris added to and embellished a little bit. The one camera setup was almost unique in television history. Not quite. There were some other shows, and there have been other shows since then, as Aaron said, that have done one camera shoots. The first one comes to mind was MASH. MASH was a one camera shoot. And in fact, when Ron Howard was on MASH, Ron Howard said he felt right at home because it was a one camera shoot, just like the Andy Griffith Show. Happy Days started out using that same technique, and then they went to a live studio audience. And the problem they had with the live studio audience, as you can see as you watch the show, and Seinfeld had the same problem, is that a live studio audience, the actors tend to play to the audience. They play for that laugh. They play for that give and take between the studio audience. And sometimes the give from the audience is overwhelming to the show. Whenever Kramer would enter the door at Jerry's apartment, there would be this eruption of applause, and it might go on for a long time and interrupt the shooting. And the same thing happened on MASH. is that, not on MASH. Listen, I just told you MASH was a one camera thing. The same thing happened on Happy Days with Fonzie. And so there was the problem sometimes with the studio audience. So Andy Griffith did not want the Andy Griffith Show to play to the audience. He didn't want Opie mugging for the audience like Rusty did on the Danny Thomas Show. He didn't want that. He didn't want a little kid playing to the audience and doing something cute and making a face at the camera looking at the audience. He wanted them to interact with each other. So the camera was just like a bystander and watching the action. And he wanted the interaction to be between characters and not between the characters and the audience. And it worked beautifully. It worked fantastic. But Andy wanted that realism, and that's what set it apart. It was real. There was no live audience. He also talked about revolving characters, characters coming in and out that were funny. We kind of touched a little bit on that. I like his Chris jumped in with the Law and Order comparison, and Chris, I would add that the red shirts on Star Trek sort of met that same criterion, where they were expendable characters, but they came in and they got used up and they left. The Andy Griffith Show, a little bit different, but I do see your analogy there. I thought it was kind of funny. I love the Seinfeld comparison that they did. The Seinfeld comparison. And think about it. It took George Costanza and Kramer, Cosmo Kramer, to make one Don Knotts, make one Barney Fife. It took two of them to make one. That's how funny Don Knotts was. He was a hilarious character. I like the comparison too of Jerry Seinfeld to Andy Griffith. And think about, in real life, there was a lot of comparison as well. They were both, number one, clean comedians, family-friendly comedians. Jerry Seinfeld was the highest grossing comedian of his age, of that comedy age. He made more money than any other comedian. They couldn't even touch him monetarily, other comedians. He was popular. He was the man. Andy Griffith may not have had the big, huge monetary score, but he was the man in comedy. He was a storyteller. He was a monologuist. But you listen to Jerry Seinfeld, and he's very monologue oriented in his comedy. He's just funny. He tells funny stories. He says things funny. And so does Andy. Andy can make anything funny just because of the way he talked. So I love that comparison. That's a beautiful comparison. He talked about people like just visiting Mayberry. Aaron was absolutely correct in that the color episodes were no less popular than the black and white episodes. Think about this. Think about Don Knotts left. One of their major stars left the show at that point. It was not in seasons 6, 7, and 8. Not only that, Aaron Rubin, the genius behind the first 5 seasons, writing and story construction, he left to direct or to produce Gomer Pyle. So you had two big hitters leave. Bob Sweeney, the director, who was just fantastic in the black and white episodes, he was gone. There were so many people that were gone. So yes, the show changed, but it did not get worse. It stayed in the top 10 just like it had started. It even ended the 8th season at number 1. It had never done that before. It ended at the highest rated single episode was in season 8. It still remained popular during its day. Today we sit back and I see people on Facebook, not in my group, but in other Facebook groups. I hate the color episodes. I'll never watch color episodes. It just wasn't the same when Don Knotts left. Yes, it wasn't the same, but it wasn't worse. The only thing that's changed is the attitude of people today versus the attitude of when it was new. They still loved Mayberry. They still loved visiting Mayberry. You are the problem with why the color episodes are bad. It's your attitude. It's not the show. The show is still good. And the show continues to be good to this day, no matter how many times I watch it. People love visiting Mayberry. People love visiting Mayberry so much that I'm going to turn you on to something and show you some pictures from where you can visit Mayberry. This is a place called the Taylor Home Inn. It's near Clear Lake, Wisconsin. Here's Allan Newsome, our very own Allan Newsome from the Two Chairs No Waiting podcast, and he's standing out in front of the house. Who wouldn't want to sit on Andy's porch and just have a relaxing evening? But the one thing that he will tell you, that everybody will tell you, is that when you walk into the Taylor Home Inn, you feel like you're in Mayberry. Allan said he felt like there should be red velvet ropes roping it off because it was like a museum. He just stood there and looked at it. Now, the lady who was there to guide him is Miss Shearman, and her and her husband put this thing together. There's even Andy's pistol. I mean, up on top of the hutch, they put everything in there. If you see that picture to the left, that is Grandma Moses' picture sugaring off. They found it. They researched the episode, figured out what the painting was, and got a duplicate copy of it. It's actually the same painting that's hanging in Andy's living room on the show. And the fireplace, they went to great detail getting the stones. The big stone that Allan is touching in this picture right here, they handmade to look like the stone that's in Andy's fireplace. The picture hanging up there is, once again, a very popular picture called the Angelus. You can look it up online. Now you'll notice that they had to combine seasons because the Taylor's living room changed from season to season. You'll notice it has the long mantle over the fireplace, which did not appear until season 2. And you see the French doors to the left of the fireplace. They disappeared in season 2. So those two things were never seen together in any one episode, but it doesn't matter. You've seen them in the episodes, and therefore they feel like you're there. You're actually in their living room. The kitchen implements, and I didn't put any pictures on here, but if you walk into their kitchen, they have gone to great lengths to find the exact same containers. They modeled the kitchen to look exactly like Aunt Bee's kitchen. The chairs are exactly the same. They went to great lengths to make this feel like you're in Andy's house. Now, Allan in this picture is standing at the top of the stairs. If you were to turn around to the right and go to the closet, remember the closet where Barney was hanging himself, supposedly? Well, if you open that, in their house at the Taylor Home Inn, it actually is an office back there, and they have stairs going down into the basement. If you go down into the basement, what you will see is the courthouse, the interior of the courthouse. Aaron and Chris, just for your edification, that map on the wall back there is actually a map of Cincinnati, Ohio, before the interstate was put in. It is not the county of Mayberry or have anything to do with North Carolina. It is Cincinnati. They researched that. They researched it. They found the exact map that is hanging on the courthouse wall, and they took green colored pencils and figured out the exact shading to shade in the green areas that you see in the color episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. They went to a lot of detail. You'll also notice they found the Motorola radio. They found the lamps with the bendable necks on it. They found chairs like they had in the show. They found the filing cabinet. They found that little fan that they had in the show. They went to great lengths to make it feel like Mayberry. Now, of course, they had to swear Floyd in as a deputy because it was probably Founders Day or something like that, and so Floyd was sworn in, and then he went over and checked out the bulletin board. By the way, the picture there over the bookcase, that is an actual duplicate picture of what they had in the courthouse. You'll see it beginning, I think, in season 2. You'll start seeing this picture. It's a picture of the presidents of the United States from Washington to Eisenhower, and it's just a nice little piece there. And they have that there. They have a duplicate picture of the newspaper headline: "Local barber captures escaped convicts." Notice down in the right-hand corner of the bulletin board, there is a fire prevention poster with Smokey the Bear on it. In literally every season of the Andy Griffith Show, there is a Smokey the Bear poster either on that bulletin board or hanging up in the back room. But there is always a Smokey the Bear fire prevention poster on there. Read my book and I'll show you where all the fire prevention posters are in season 1. Even when Andy was calling Barney Smokey the Bear in his Mountie uniform, there was a Smokey the Bear poster right behind you. Of course, if you mess up the bulletin board, you get in trouble and you have to stand before Andy, and there are dire consequences. But even though Allan was arrested, he was released so he could go to Wally's and get a bottle of pop. What they've done is they've taken the back of the house and they converted it into Wally's service station. And so you can see the gasoline pumps there, and you can actually get a bottle of pop. And that is the Mayberry experience. That's what we love. I've never been to the Taylor Home Inn, but I have been to the Ponderosa Ranch where they shot Bonanza. And it was amazing to walk into the Cartwright's living room and see all this incredible stuff that I had seen when I was a kid, and I just saw it on TV. I felt like I was back in time. That's what Mayberry is. It sends us back in time to a gentler place, a more fun-loving place. It's just a great time. Mayberry Days, which is the last week, full week of September every year. And it is people just going back in time in their minds by visiting Andy Griffith's hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina, and seeing everything: the Snappy Lunch, the Grand Theater, all these different things that we see on Mayberry are right there because it was based on Mount Airy. Whether Andy wanted to admit it until late in life or not, we know it was based on that area. You can go visit Mayberry, Virginia, the Mayberry Trading Post. You can see Pilot Mountain, which is where they got the name Mount Pilot, and all these different things that you can see there. Squad cars everywhere, people dressed up like characters from the show. It's a fun time, and everybody is friends because the Andy Griffith Show brings us all together. And if I can encourage you to do anything, it's spread that Mayberry spirit. I appreciate you being here. Until next time, I'll see you.